Hey everyone, Brian Beeler coming to you from the StorageReview conference room. Joining me today for the first time ever on live streams, we've got Kevin O'Brien, who runs the test lab.
Yeah, it's enjoyable.
It is enjoyable. And today we're talking about Synology's latest products. So Synology, of course, makes all these fine NAS devices, which we all know and love. And they've made switches and routers before. You're actually a pretty big fan of the routing products, aren't you?
Yeah, they work well. I'm not sure if they've done a lot of updates recently, but I mean, they've been improving the software. But
And they've got the VPN deal.
Yeah, it was free. I think it's free through September.
Yeah, so Synology's done other products outside of just NAS. And some of those that we are talking about today are these SSDs. So Synology released about a week and a half ago a SATA line called the SAT 5200 and an NVMe line of SSDs, the SNV 3400 and SNV 3500. Now we've reviewed both of those drives already, and Kevin will walk you through the technical analysis there. And then the plan is going to be to show you one of the Synology NAS we have in operation, go through how it works, what the cache looks like, and give you guys a better feel for how that behaves in these modern Synology NASs. And just by way of example, let's take a look at this 720 Plus. Now we reviewed this recently, but what Synology's been doing is on the underneath of their devices, they've been putting in these two bays, and they're just simple little plastic clips that can come out. And you can see that there are two NVMe SSDs inside. Now these are, I think, Optanes left over. They're Optanes left over from our review of this 720 Plus, which actually did really, really well. And to be honest, we were a little bit concerned about it because it only has gigabit Ethernet on the back.
Yeah.
You like to see 10 gig, of course, anytime you're messing with
Well,
Flash.
It would be nice. I mean, things have gotten a lot faster these days. It'd be nice to push it over to the network.
All right, but it still did really well. And even in that review, when we look at the data, the cached results with the Optane drives in front, I mean, there was an obvious giant chasm
definitely
in certain tests, right?
Oh, yeah.
So we accept that the NVMe drives help, so it's going to be interesting to see when we look at the reviews and then when we do the system review with the NVMe drives from Synology in these NAS devices to see how it does. Also today, whoever asks the best question, and we'll determine that by some unknown scoring rubric, is going to take home this DS214 Play. Is that what this guy is?
Yeah, so I think one of the first ones with the decoding features built in for...
Is it decoding or encoding?
Maybe both.
Yeah,
it's been a while.
Did you get it out of his cereal box? Your secret decoder ring? So we'll give this away and a pair of these WD Red 3 terabyte drives to whoever asks the best question. If you live in the US, we'll bundle it up and ship it for free. If you're international, just help us out on the shipping. So ask your questions as we go. We'll address all of them through this. And we'll get started with taking a look. Let's take a look at the reviews first. Why don't we pull up the SATA review and show us there we go, and show us some of the key findings from this guy.
Yeah, so the SATA drive actually performed really well. So the previous devices in this market were a SATA or Seagate offering as well as WD, and both of those guys kind of hit the market in different ways. But Synology came out with a more of an enterprise-ish variant. A lot of people are really concerned about, like, well, it's a newcomer in the market. How are they going to perform? And surprisingly, it did really well. So for the SATA comparables, it basically led in most of those areas.
Which is interesting because SATA is, as we know, near the end of its development life cycle, and to see something that, although they quote 530 read and 500 write, I mean, almost every SATA drive ever has quoted that on the sticker, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, and sometimes they'll go 550, 500, but then the actual performance is much different. But yeah, I mean, this was neat just to see them gap out against other similar spec drives.
Yeah, and then when you went into so this is an area where the WD product definitely favored the read workloads. Seagate's preferred the write, or did better in the write areas. The Synology product actually led everything in the SATA group, so best read and write performance.
Which is interesting because it tells you that even though the Iron Wolf, which is a little higher endurance, the WD drive is lower endurance, so I guess the read-write mix makes sense there. It's just really interesting to me that Synology was able to spec out this drive to do so well in both, because as you say, it's normally a trade-off.
Yeah, and if you look at the sequential write performance, it actually had some of the most stable and the highest performance, so it was pretty good.
And we're looking at the blue line, right? For
yes, the blue line.
Cheating at home. Okay, so that's pretty cool. What did we see on the NVMe side?
So the NVMe product was a little bit different, and this is, I think this is an area where it gets a little kind of confusing because when you look at the Synology offerings, right now, the only way to leverage M.2 SSDs is through the 2 ports on the bottom. You can't really leverage it, and you can only use it as a cache device. You can't have it as a flash tier.
Right, I was going to get to that. That is kind of the rub with Synology's implementation of these M.2 NVMe bays, is that they're only available for caching. They're not available to be used as a volume, which, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm sort of torn. On one side, it's like, I guess if you're going to put, especially in like this 720 Plus on the desk here, if you're going to put hard drives in it, you're probably wanting to accelerate those hard drives rather than have an all-flash volume. On the other hand, the competitors do it. QNAP does it. They can use pretty much any drive, can do anything. So
wait, and it's not like it's going through a different like logical interface. You have it set up where it should just interact like any other device in the system. It's just a software setting that says like you can use it for cache only. We've seen that even from the one of the old rack station platforms that had separate 2.5-inch bays for SATA SSDs, and it was cache only. You couldn't incorporate for the rest of the for like a larger pool or anything.
So I'm wondering if maybe that's a DSM updatable item that one day that they could put out a release and enable that functionality.
Yeah, it would
There's
be nice.
Probably not a reason that they couldn't do it, right?
Yeah.
All right, so we'll see what the market says. All right, so going back to the NVMe drive, I should point out that the 3400 and 3500 are the same product, really. It's a 400 gig drive. The biggest difference is length. The 3400 we reviewed is the 2280, which is a pretty typical 80 mil M.2 board. The 3500's 22110, which is a little bit longer.
Yeah, it's kind of confusing because if you look at it for
why would you want the 110?
Well, yeah, because if it's centered around installing a Synology, I'm not sure if I've seen a Synology that has onboard 110 millimeter slots. They have an adapter card that allows you to go between, it's like the different increments up to 110 millimeter. But for a stock product, 80 millimeter is pretty much the default standard across all the Synology lines. So why offer it?
You've got me. I was asking the same question. And before you get into the performance on this, let's bang through a couple of questions because our chat queue is filling up. Joe wants the 100 terabyte SSDs for a low price of 40 grand. I don't even know if they're that inexpensive unless he's talking about the Nimbus drive, that big 100 terabyte SATA guy that Nimbus has been working on. That's promising. It's not a fast drive, but who knows? Maybe Flash can unseat some more of that archive tier. Nathan, do these NASs that support NVMe drives, can they support RAID between the hard drives and the SSDs? And the answer there is, as you said, this is really just a cache product.
Correct, yeah. You can't use this as an extension of the existing pool.
No one's going to remember this, at least I don't, but you don't remember if that 214 Slim decodes X265, do you?
You'd have to look at the original spec sheet. It's far too long since I've seen that.
Jeff, it's been 6 years. We're going to have to send you back to the spec shed to go figure out the answer to that. Xavier, what's the reliability like on this compared to SATA? So I assume you're asking NVMe versus SATA. In our testing, we only have 4 of these drives, so it's hard to definitively talk about these specifically, but you haven't seen any reliability issues in years between interface, have you?
No, it's been a while since I've actually seen bad products. I mean, usually we'll have a couple of bad sectors on a hard drive here and there, but flash products have been very reliable.
GPSZ1000, would you need any special type of error correcting in SATA or NVMe drives?
Probably not. I mean, Synology spec these for their NAS platform. You'd kind of hope that they're taking the right direction.
Well, on error correction's pretty low level at this point, but the SATA drive also has power protection and some other stuff that you don't typically see in a consumer-facing drive.
So it's a more enterprise scenario, although Most of these platforms are designed, if you're going to enable write cache and other things, to incorporate them with the UPS. And Synology does have tie-ins where you can connect it up to the UPS and it'll have monitoring to safely shut down in a power fail scenario.
Yes, I had that set up in my basement where my Synology is, and the battery
Synology can't replace your battery, though.
Son of a gun. So it would hold up power for a solid 30 to 45 seconds before it would beep and everything would die in the basement. But I've since remedied that. Jeff is back with a follow-up. What would be a good use case for the SATA, except cost, older hardware limitations? I assume, Jeff, you're talking about SATA SSDs. The use case is really one of, I think it's more multi-tenancy. But what do you think in terms of the value of flash, SATA flash versus SATA hard drive?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you have multi-users in a particular environment, flash does help out a lot. And if you have your NAS as RAID 1 kind of protected storage as an extension for like file shares, flash ends up being a lot faster. If you have it for desktops or notebooks migrating around, it helps out. In the SATA offering, you can have it as a direct flash volume. You don't have to worry about it as a hard drive with cache on top. You can use it as just flat flash.
Okay. So Noah's asking about the NVMe drives. Would it be great to use in basically something that has 10 gig E on it? Generally speaking, yes, but again, these are cache, so it's going to depend a good deal on the underlying storage and what you're trying to do here. But yes, anything with 10 G is going to be better. And we've talked a lot actually about 2.5 gig, and Synology hasn't done that yet on their new units. Probably getting to a transition point soon, but even that would help a little bit, wouldn't it?
I would hope.
Yeah.
It's been an area where 2.5 and 5 gig have been more emerging, and as we're more enterprise facing, we see the 1, the 10, the 25, the 50, the 100 gig, 200 gig, etc. 2.5 and 5, we're still trying to source a good vendor on a switch, but in a home environment, it does offer fast interconnect without having to lag together a lot of 1 gig ports.
All right, so I stopped you in the middle of this. Let's go back to the data. Just as a reminder, these are 400 gig drives spec'd at 3,100 megabytes per second read and 500 megabytes per second write. Now that number jumps out as like they're missing a zero or something, because most drives would be at 2,000 or 3,000 or whatever, some ridiculous number.
Well, so I'm not sure if it really matters for this drive. A lot of people might be comparing spec sheet numbers, but if you look at this particular product, in its current form, you can only use it as a cache. And by default, when you enable a cache device on a Synology product, sequential writes pass through, because if you have a large enough group, your hard drives are able to absorb sequential writes pretty well. So if you look at it from that perspective, write performance is not as important as read performance.
Right, because we're going to be reading. It'll write, obviously, is a little bit, but we're going to be spending most of the time reading from this cache.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get down to the numbers.
Okay, so Synology spec'd, I think it was 205,000 IOPS read, and we measured around 199, so pretty close to spec sheet numbers. And this is an area where it starts to slip back compared to some of the other offerings, and this guy at the front is one of the Samsung Enterprise variants, this low drive write per day drive, but I mean, it's kind of comparable in this market segment.
All right, so the comps are a little tricky here because it's not like we've got a world of drives to choose from in this sort of target. So you used a leading drive, Samsung, which was a lower endurance drive. The red line is
the Seagate Iron Wolf.
Okay, and then the Synology drive in blue again.
Yeah. So going towards write workloads, though, that Samsung dropped off significantly, and this guy performs pretty well behind the Iron Wolf.
Which is hilarious because I just told you how bad the writes are on this drive.
So
okay.
it works pretty well in comparison to other products. So we move along to other workloads. The sequential read topped out at around 2 gigabytes a second, and again, it's kind of middle of the pack. And this is an area where it performed better than the Seagate offering, a little bit behind the Samsung offering, but again, that Samsung offering is more of a true enterprise drive. So it kind of depends on what you're looking at.
So you're talking about that, and we've got a question here specifically. What are your opinions? This is from Jordan Byers on the Synology NVMe drives. Do you think they can be a true player in the enterprise NVMe field against the likes of Samsung and presumably others? I don't know if Synology is really trying to do that in terms of distributing the drives, because they are a little more expensive than some of their competitors at the moment. I don't know if they're going for 1,000 drive pallets going into Facebook or anything like that.
No, I think it's more of a general consumer doesn't know what to buy for their particular NAS. They know flash is going to be better, and why not go for a product sold by the vendor that makes your platform?
Yeah, it does feel a little more integrated in that way, even though the drive's still made by someone else and someone else's controller. It's not that there's a lot of special sauce here, but you would assume that there's some degree of qualification or something that's better. And if you go into Best Buy or Fry's, and you're looking at these things on the shelf, it's pretty easy, I would think, to just say, I need this, this, and this, and bundle it together. And I would expect that we'll see some bundles. It will be interesting to see if they do any hard drive bundles and how much Synology's aggravating their partners at WD and Seagate with this move. I suppose we will see.
Okay, so sequential write, this guy, again, it kind of falls in line with just under where their max spec sheet number was, but it does pretty well compared to the other devices it's compared against. So it's not like the other devices in that segment of low drive write per day offered incredibly impressive write performance. And even if you're going to say there are other 1 drive write per day NVMe products that are a hell of a lot faster on the market, this guy's an M.2. It's not a U.2. Mm-hmm. So the form factor does matter, and you're probably going to find better things on the U.2 form factor side just because there's so many more offerings. But
you don't want to throw away two drive bays on the front of these things either for caching.
Well, yeah, and then those drives are going to use more power. They're not going to be as user-friendly as these things.
Okay. For Joe, who's talking about the WD Reds, those are specifically targeted for NAS devices. So that's why you're seeing those show up on the SATA charts. And there's not a red NVMe drive yet, but or at least not that we've seen anyway.
No.
But there probably will be. It wouldn't be hard for them to do a derivative of their SN750 or 550, right, to make a NAS drive.
Well, yeah, but they'd have to see this market segment as something to specifically go against, although they do. I mean, they've had the products designed for NAS or security or like any of those other areas. So if someone's going to do it, it'll probably end up being WD at some point.
Okay. We do have a shout out from Northeast Ohio.
Who?
Sean Woodworth from Northeast Ohio. Oh man, I bet Sean's missing the lake effect snow about now. It's so miserable in December, but I could go for about 6 inches of snow right about now when it's 94 out.
It would be nice, yes.
Although I suppose it would just turn into rain. All right, what else do you have on workloads?
So not that you'd be running these guys in full enterprise areas with SQL or application workloads. This does kind of fall into the area of you can run interesting things on the Synology platforms. So you can run Docker containers and...
All right, don't go down the Docker road yet. I want to come back to that.
Well, so my point, though, is you're going to be able to run different workloads that will fall slightly outside of what you normally run against over like a CIFS share. So that's where this type of product tends to get used in more interesting ways. And this is an area where even though that's not, that Samsung product had lower write speeds, it just dominated the other mixed workloads, where the Seagate and the Synology offerings were kind of higher latency and slightly lower speeds. The Samsung just blew everything else away. But this is kind of going outside the comfort zone for these products.
Right, and that's an important differentiation. So Aaron is getting aggravated with me because I missed part of the question he asked before. Are there any thickness restrictions on the M.2 slots? I don't think so. They're pretty spacious in there, so you could take a double-sided drive, I think.
Oh yeah, we've put bigger drives in those. They're
thicker.
Yeah,
right.
I think and they don't have, at least the ones that we've seen, don't have limitations on needing attachment for a thermal pad or anything like that.
Yeah, so there's plenty of room in there. So there's another question, and I just want to make sure that we're thorough on this. So the question is, so I guess it caches to NVMe and then writes back to the hard drive. Can you talk specifically, Kevin, about the data path interaction there?
Well, it's going to act as a cache, not a tier, so it doesn't add into the capacity of the underlying volume, but it pins to a volume on the product. I don't believe right now each cache device can only hit one volume, at least the way I've seen it set up. So it's you create a large volume from your hard drives, and then you pin one cache device to it. And then you can do filtering based on do you want random I/O to hit it, or do you want sequential?
And we're going to walk through all that.
Yeah.
So we're going to go through the Synology DSM and show you how all of that works. Let's get one more question before we switch over to the interface. Nathan, you said competitors allow the NVMe slots to be used as anything. What's the reason they're only used as cache in the Synology devices? I don't know that we have an answer for that, and that's going to be a good one to keep peppering Synology on. Also, can it be updated via DSM at some point to be a volume? I think it should be able to. Shouldn't be a big deal. We hope they do it, but like I said, we've had plenty of other NAS in from QNAP and others that have pushed a little further down the road on the flexibility of those ports. I think maybe when Synology started, the idea was let's slam these M.2 slots on our NASs and they can accelerate hard drives. They probably didn't conceive or didn't think that people would want to do a little 2-drive volume, which, no problem, and certainly may be appealing to a certain set of audience. I could see, even on this little 720 Plus, I could see having a big disk hard drive share for your photos and files and all your stuff, and then to have just something else on those SSDs if you wanted to pin them there to really make sure you've got acceleration.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to flip over to DSM here, and let's take a look at the interface, and you can walk us through how this works.
So right now we have a storage pool already existing. I put a volume on it. So I have a couple of CIF shares and also some iSCSI LUNs. And these are all sitting on that single volume inside the storage pool. So with that said, there's no cache currently on the device.
Did you forget to put the drives in?
No, the drives are in. You just have to go and create it. And this is where you can see cache devices show up as completely separate devices. Those two SSDs, you can use them as cache, but actually, I'm not. We'll have to go through, because I think on some of these, if you have a specific cache device, it'll only allow you to select those. But we'll see if we can what we're going to do with those two NVMe drives. So with that said, I have a workload generator that can start hitting this platform already connected. And we're going to go through, I'm going to start my workload on a separate system. And once that is running...
While you're setting that up, Noah asks, with Synology shipping these NAS devices, what about these new drives will make people switch? And I think that, like what we've said before, brand awareness of Synology NAS, Synology drive, the affinity there is probably one thing. But on the SATA specifically, it's a better drive than what's out there. And if you want what do they go up to? 1.92 terabytes, 480 to 192.
Yeah, I think the Red's topped at 960.
Right. So you get more capacity in a NAS-oriented drive, better performance. The only thing, again, is going to be pricing, because Synology's out now, limited volumes, new product, so they're priced a little bit higher, but that'll probably come down. So that'll be something that happens. Kevin, New Tom Sawyer wants to know, what do you feel is NVMe's role in the various markets, consumer, data hoarder, data center?
Well, it's fast. It's not going to be cheap, but for people that it's starting to become an option there for how you're going to leverage flash, it's another...
Well, let's start with consumer. So you've got a 2 or 4 bay or 5 bay at home, and you've got photos and family stuff on there. Is cache going to help that user?
Probably not, although when you start going to the onboard photo apps and other areas that start to index the different files and then encode and build out smaller thumbnails, there could be an advantage of flash there.
Probably an advantage of an extra RAM DIMM too, if you can.
Yeah.
Data hoarder, so much of that is streaming large block files. I don't know if the cache is going to be necessarily helpful there.
No, I think that's still firmly planted in the category of hard drives.
And on the data center side, we're seeing all flash NVMe arrays. That's the new de facto standard. So I don't think we're going backwards to SAS anytime soon. Certainly there will be legacy support there, but nothing new from the large vendors is going to be SAS. Now, I will say, we've heard a lot of service providers that are still deploying SATA flash arrays because they're good enough, but more importantly, they're inexpensive enough to get the job done. But even NVMe drives, WD's got one in the 640, Kioxia's got one, where the price metrics of the NVMe drives, the typical U.2, is really aggressive and on par with SATA in some cases. All right, so what do you have going on?
So we've created the cache from our two M.2 NVMe SSDs, and we have it set to a read-write cache. If you have just one SSD, you're forced into read. If you have two, you can do read-write cache because it sets it up in a RAID 1 pair. And with that on, we attach it to the volume, and we turned off the skip sequential I/O so we can start filling it up. And right now we see in real time we have a nearly 100% read or cache hit process as it's going through, and we see the use capacity slowly ticking up. The underlying files they'll be caching are about 100 gigabyte in size, so that will be the top end point where it starts to taper off. But until then, as the workload's hitting, it's absorbing it all into cache to start making it available to be read out faster.
So we've got a question about endurance, I think is the root of the question, in RAID 5.6. Is the endurance gotten to the point in SSDs where RAID 5 or 6 makes sense or is viable? Are you doing, I guess we're seeing some of the enterprise arrays taking a RAID formatting like that, but we still see a lot of 1 and 10 too.
Yeah, well, RAID 5 I think has been, I believe it's still the standard on a lot of the Dell flash arrays. The NetApp approach is kind of more of a RAID 6 with dual parity, but a lot of these guys, the drives aren't really failing as much. So it's in some of these platforms, it's not the traditional RAID 5. It's kind of imagine you have like 24 drives, split them all in half. Each controller gets half of each drive, and then you have like a spare allocation spread across all of them. So it's not like you have 23 working drives, one drive sitting idle. Everything's working, and there's enough spare space in there for a drive failure.
Okay. You have been using Synology. Well, I've been using them for a long time, but I'm a no-touch kind of user. Put it in the basement, auto updates, and leave it alone. We've got a question from John about how often Synology updates DSM and throws patches and stuff out there. Do you have a sense on that?
I'll see. You have to go back to their change logs, but I see multiple updates per year, and a lot of them you can have it set to automatically download and update itself, or just automatically download and then notify you when a newer version is available. But it's a fairly common occurrence.
Yeah, and he's asking about vulnerabilities like Windows DNS, and Synology has not been immune from vulnerabilities. Actually, none of the NAS guys have had file sharing capabilities out to the cloud, right? That's the more likely scenario.
Yeah, and a lot of the NAS platforms got hit with the different. I try to think of the term there, but there were a lot of botnets that were looking for open, like port 5000, and it would start hammering on your platform to see if it could log in. And I've managed quite a few of these Synologies now, and I think it was the day some of those vulnerability. It wasn't really vulnerability, just more of an attack on them. You could look at the platforms that didn't have auto block enabled, and you'd start seeing like 40 attempts per minute. And
right.
To that extent,
well, you got poked on that, didn't you? Didn't you have one, or someone in your family have one that was open?
Well, the thing, most of ours are open to the World Wide Web,
right.
But with that in mind, we have there's a feature in the Synology side for security. Let's see, where is it? Yes, the auto block, and the
auto bot rollout.
No, just auto block.
Okay. Also rollout.
Yeah, so it can automatically block login attempts after a certain number of failed attempts over a certain number of minutes. What I left doing is basically setting this number as high as possible, so multiple login attempts by the same IP address over a few days or weeks or whatever, and I usually give them 2 attempts, and then they get on the block list. And Usually it doesn't bite me in the ass in case I fat finger and mistype, and in that case I'll go to like a separate device that's not blocked. But it keeps the things locked down well enough so you can still do some file sharing out into the cloud. Most of the important stuff that we have here now for cameras, etc., are beyond a VPN. But there are some ways to ratchet up security on these devices that, there could be flaws out there. There probably still are. It takes a while for people to find them. But one of the big things is some people don't turn on auto block, and someone just hammers away until they figure out what your password is.
I don't probably have that turned on, which is why the kids probably get mad at me at night when Fortnite slows down, because our network is being bludgeoned by someone trying to access my family photos.
Thankfully, I think yours is double natted, so your Synology is probably not talking to the outside world anyways.
I can't even access it remotely, so yeah, good point. All right, we've got a couple of value questions from Aaron and Joe. Do you have a price comparison of the Synology versus Seagate versus Samsung in those tests? No, pricing's so dynamic that typically in our reviews we'll mention the price of the product under review at that time, but because these products, especially as you push more into enterprise drives that might have a productive longevity span of 3 or 4 years, really, we just don't. It's just too dynamic. But it is something that is a useful comparison. So you'll see in a lot of our reviews where we'll say, I think we just did it with one of the Crucial drives where we said it's really slow, but it's also really cheap. And if you want cheap, and it'll probably get cheaper, just kind of keep your eye on that space.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we've seen a drive that is launched at a cheaper price and then slowly goes up. It's always you want space to move down. You're not going to have a price adjustment going up.
Those Optane ones are the only ones that we've seen kind of bounce around a lot. So if you look at them on Camel or something, you'll see a wide variety where most others will sort of
I think some of those were
down.
Production related, because some of those drives just stopped being available.
All right, so on the other side, Joe's got a question. What's the best bang for your buck with these NVMe and SATA SSDs? So he's saying, would you rather have NVMe for cache and 2 SATA hard drives, or no NVMe with 2 SATA SSDs? I mean, that for me comes down to use case capacity and budget, right?
Oh yeah, and it's also going to come down to what NAS do you have. I mean, if it's this 2-bay here, you don't really have a lot of options for a, do you want 2 hard drives, 2 SSDs, or like 2 NVMe? You're probably going to go for 2 hard drives.
Right.
I think as soon as you go from like that 4-bay up to an 8-bay, you start getting a little more options, because most people are probably going to want to run RAID 6 or RAID 1 on their, RAID 1 on a 2-bay, RAID 6 on a 4 or greater bay platform, and you're going to need open hard drive slots.
We should probably do this again soon with a QNAP too. I know we've got one on the way, a new one, and we've got several in the lab. I don't want to pick on Synology, but I love how they've got a cluster of 2.5-inch bays, 3.5-inch bays, and M.2s on their larger units.
Yeah, but to Synology's credit, when you look at some of the competing platforms, you see it looks like there's 100 different models available, but it's just really variants of. You can pick a faster processor, a slower processor, more base memory, less base memory. In a Synology platform, you buy a DS1819 Plus, and it's the model you buy. You might have one that is diskless or available with additional drives, but you know what you're buying. With a lot of the other platforms, you might not know what you're getting.
Right. So, Joe, for me, I think it comes down to how much multi-tenancy do you have? What are your users doing, and does Flash meet the capacity requirement and budget requirement? Normally it's budget that gets you. So if it's dollars related, you could go hard drives and then NVMe. If it's performance related, then skip the NVMe perhaps and just put all that budget into SATA SSD. All right, we've got another question here from Noah. What do you think is the biggest application for these drives in the enterprise? You guys tested SQL and Oracle. We like the enterprise apps because it just speaks so much to everywhere from small office all the way up to the enterprise. So Oracle maybe less, but SQL for sure. We do some VDI workloads too. And even on individual drives, we like to run the SQL because, well, to your point, a lot of people do that from a dev
Yeah, I mean, you might want a workstation that has enough CPU and RAM, maybe not a it's not enterprise grade in the sense of you're going to run the final workload on it, but you want to see how your database is going to perform, your different command sets are going to perform. So you see different enterprise programs run on a lot of these smaller systems now, especially as I think a lot of IT administrators saying like, okay, this cool new like vSAN platform came out. How am I going to test out my home? Or a new application just came out as a Docker container. How can I run that at home before I start deploying it and have to interact with it at the like my business or something?
Well, I think that's one of the greatest things about a small NAS at home. If you're an IT practitioner, it's a great way to just mess around and have access and test benchmarking and all sorts of other sandbox type opportunities. And we're going to look at the Docker thing because Kevin and I were having a conversation today actually about we've done a little bit of Docker work on Synology before, and you get to the point where you can run small applications in that test dev sort of way. So we'll look at that in a second. Another question about cache pools. I mean, the NVMe is cache only. Of course, if you use the SATA drives and the SATA bays, you can make flash pools with those. That's no big deal. If you have an NVMe as cache, is that why some NAS devices only have 1 meg of RAM? I don't think. Have we seen any 1 meg? We've seen some 2. I think this guy's only got
2 gig.
2 gig. Yeah, I don't know about the 1. Maybe you meant gig. But yeah, I think we're seeing 2 as sort of the floor on NAS, and most of the bigger bay ones will have 4 with another slot to expand. What are you using as Workload Generator for these tests? Why don't you talk about that?
So on the NAS side, we use FIO for CIFS and iSCSI workloads. And then as we move up into our enterprise area, we'll have our VMware-based load gens, and we'll have different CentOS VMs for VDBench. We'll start to deploy SQL Server itself on a lot of these different storage devices. We'll run Sysbench through MySQL. There's a lot of different. It really depends on the platform, because some we like to build them up for very strong workloads. Others, if you try to apply some of the workloads on the smaller device, it would just crush them. So it really depends on what the device is.
Okay. So this is a great question, Rick Clark. Is Synology going to have any perks built into DSM for using their drives? And we were talking about this today too. So I think what you're getting at is like Seagate has the Iron Wolf Health Manager, Monitor Manager.
It's even built into the QNAP and Synology platforms. Right.
And so is there an opportunity there? Absolutely. What is Synology's plan? I don't know, but they definitely should, because Seagate really made the effort with Iron Wolf to integrate with Synology, QNAP, ASUS Store, a handful of others.
It was a gigantic push when that came out.
Right. We even did a little paper on that.
Yeah.
And it's really neat because it shows you charts. It shows you some wear indicators on the drive, which I think is useful, especially if you're worried about eating up the endurance of a cache drive. So it's not there now, but it's definitely something that they should be doing. Would anything greater than 400 gig NVMe drives even be relevant without using them as storage? I've read about people using 240 gig of cache without any issue. Do you think 400 gigs enough space? Actually, why don't you talk about the sizing, because I know you were exploring some of that before.
So sizing, as a cache, I really think that you're probably going to start pushing your limits with the smaller devices up until you can use them as a flat, like a pure flat flash pool, because it's going to take a long time to start propagating stuff into cache. And if it's a gigantic cache, you might have like ancient workloads still sitting inside of it that don't need to be there. Or if it's a flash tier, maybe you only have the workloads that you want to have in there. And if it's a smaller size, maybe it's exercised a little more, but
in that 720 Plus review, you ran those Optane SSDs as cache, and they're, 80 gig or 100 gig? They're tiny, right?
Yeah, I think they're 108 gig.
108 gig, a normal.
Or maybe 118, I'm not sure.
Normal size. But those were wildly effective. So I think the point being 400 gig is a nice mid-ground for Synology to go with, but you can get away with much less.
Yeah.
If you had one NVMe drive in it for cache, would a failure cause any data loss when writing, assuming the cache can
because
be read-write?
You're forced to use it only as a read cache if it's a single drive. So if it dies, there's no harm.
Go back to that configuration. Can you show just what that looks like?
Yeah, so right now you can only remove it once
Okay,
it's
because we already
set up.
set up. But when you're going through the process,
There is that way to have it skip sequential I/O so it doesn't eat up endurance.
got another question that I haven't thought about, but is a good question from Joe. Can DSM be installed on a VM just for testing the software?
They don't allow that.
Gosh, that would be nice though, wouldn't it?
I almost think they had a downloadable DSM version like a long time ago, but it really comes down to you're buying Synology for that ecosystem, kind of like you buy a Mac for that ecosystem, not to buy, or I think a lot of people would enjoy buying OS X outside of the Apple product.
Yeah,
but
good
you
luck
can't.
with that. At the same time, QNAP is got a version of their offering in the cloud, so they figured out a way to at least decouple one of their software packages to get into the cloud.
I wouldn't say they found a way. It was more just like they decided, may as well do it.
So that's probably step one, honestly, would be to see a cloud-based instance of DSM for replication or something of that nature.
Yeah, although I suppose for replication or backup, you can already back up things into the cloud from the different NAS platforms. But
Apparently saying Autobots roll out has engendered questions about the Transformer movies. Noah wants to know who's your favorite girl from the Transformer movies. I think you've got a good answer there, Noah, and we'll carry on from there, but appreciate the levity. In your opinion on the efficacy of SSD NAS in comparison to the other hard drive NAS and time period of usability, as the SSDs usually tend to get worn down with heavy usability. We haven't seen, and this gets back to the software package idea of having visibility into the wear leveling of the drive. We haven't seen drives be hammered by endurance, even under your heavy tests when you beat them up for array reviews or surfer reviews.
yeah, it's been a while since we've seen a drive just outright die during our testing. And
From endurance, though.
yeah, and
specifically.
even when we start looking at a lot of these platforms, it's like you look at it like one drive write per day, and you have a 400 gig drive. Who's writing 400 gigabytes of their drive day after day? Even
No,
on
that's the point, right? Is
Yeah.
they're really hard to actually write that much to the drive.
Yeah, and even if you look at the QLC offerings, they're lower, but they still have. I mean, you're gonna have days where it's like Steam sales are out and you're downloading as many games as possible, or massive Windows updates nightly. I don't know, but you're not going to generally download that much every single day. But in an enterprise area as a cache device, you will have more workloads go in and out. But I'm not sure. We haven't really seen endurance as a problem for a while.
No, not at all. We've got a number of batches of drives, the old Toshiba drives, the SATA Crew, those Memblaze drives, Microns that we've beaten over and over and over again for many days at a time through many server platforms. And
The last drive that I had
like
fail,
at 90-something%,
well,
right?
the last drive I had fail wasn't from endurance. There was an 8 terabyte, I think it was actually an Intel drive that just stopped one day. But
That's the more likely outcome with a flash drive, is it just goes away.
yeah, it was I think it was like the first week or two that I was in the office and it just stopped. But you don't really have drives just fail
So
through endurance.
through DSM, does Synology show any wear leveling or in the smart details or anything along those lines for those
I
that want
didn't
to keep an eye
see
on
anything
endurance?
in that health area. So you can look in here for health attributes. Let's see, percentage used. You can probably drill in through it. The area that I was hoping they would have, similar to the Seagate Iron Wolf built-in health manager, is something that would show you like what the expected lifespan of the product to be. Because
That's what I was saying with IHM. Is that's my favorite part. Is it shows you doesn't it show like a 5-year window and the projected life of your drive? And that would go a long way to deal with the concerns that Rahul brought up about, I'm putting these drives in there. I have some degree of faith that they will survive, but they are, flash by its nature is somewhat consumable, so that it might be working in 10 years, but probably not.
Yeah.
And so having a visualization for that would be useful.
But it might be coming in a later point. These just came on the market. There's
Right.
probably gonna be something around them.
Yeah.
Or one could hope.
John wants to know, assuming Synology Drive allows basic encryption of hard drives, is there any other security feature Synology devices offer that set them apart from others? We haven't spent a whole lot of time on security features specifically, aside from your Autobots rollout feature that bounces the remote intruders away. But are you aware of anything else that stands out from a security standpoint?
Not really. I mean, a lot of these devices still fall back to you don't want someone else to have physical control of it. And I think a lot of the enterprise grade security elements are going to come more into those higher enterprise platforms. You can encrypt You can encrypt storage on a Synology. You can do your software key and whatnot, but I haven't really seen a huge implementation on different security hardware elements.
Joe's giving a shout out on that live cache hit view. He's a fan of that dancing green lights.
It works better when it's a faster NAS and it fills up faster, but we're limited to two 1 gig ports on this guy.
Yes, that is the downside of that. We've got a couple new systems coming on. What about USB expansion options? What goes on there? I know at home I actually use a USB 3 drive as a backup, so a local backup. And of course you can use cloud backup, and you can use rsync and some other things. What else are people using the USB slots for?
You could use it to connect another UPS or a single UPS to have it.
Oh yeah, I did that before my battery died. I should probably plug that back in.
But a lot of it's like card readers to import, like ingest a lot of photos. You have additional hard drives plugged in for either separate shares to stand up or a backup target. But you're not going to use the onboard USB slot to expand additional storage. There are some solutions where you can expand using a eSATA port on the back, but you're not going to do anything with that over USB.
All right. One of the things I meant to bring up when we were talking about use cases is I was at the Synology conference in New York 2 years ago, and it's funny because I got to meet probably dozens of Synology distributors in the lower Manhattan area, or I guess broader New York City area. And it's funny because we get into these things and sort of think about different modalities and consumption models and use cases. But someone just brought up in the questions, Jordan was asking about NVR use cases. And there are a ton of guys that are putting these systems into convenience stores, that are running their NVR, their POS, whatever else is local to that convenience store, bodega, or whatever. So NVR is a tremendous use case. In fact, I'm looking out the window here and see our cameras. Kevin's got 7 or 8 set up around the office here, and that's all feeding back to Synology using their NVR software, isn't it?
Yeah, we've enjoyed the Synology surveillance station over the years. It's handy. It's quick to get into. I'll have it up on my screen most of the time during the day just to see when UPS comes. We have a nice view out into the parking lot.
In case someone parks too close to your car and smashes the side of it and
possibly,
says they didn't do it when they did because the video shows it.
And we can export it quickly for a police officer to look at the video. But
in that case, NVMe usefulness in terms of cache, probably not huge for NVR.
No, not definitely.
The other question about NVR is playback or live view. Anything there that's beneficial, do you think?
No, I mean a lot of the NVR, you're talking about a ton of data being written all the time. If you have a lot of cameras, a lot of data, I'm not sure you're going to have enough activity hitting it over a specific file to want to get it into cache. So unless you're looking at the exact same clip, like damn it, my door's been dented so many times.
One time I saw you do it.
Yeah, you're not going to run into it. You're not going to run that clip, most of us aren't going to run that clip 20 times a day or more.
I did. I watched it. It was very sad. All right, let's go back, check in on our cache guy. What's going on now?
So it's slow as the amount of use capacity increases. We're getting a higher hit count, and we can look at the I/O activity in the drives. Let's see if I can remember how to go in through here. So we can see the cache drives, the activity hitting those. So right now they are mostly just handling write activity. There's some read activity coming out of them at the moment. But you can get a good idea of like what the what the bandwidth and throughput is of the given drive in the platform looking through the resource manager.
Okay. So this is pretty cool. Do you have anything else you want to show us on caching before we take a real quick peek into Docker?
There's not a lot here to look at caching. It's really simple.
It just kind of goes, right?
Yeah, you turn it on or you turn it off, or you configure, like, do you want to bypass sequential I/O? There's not really adjustment after that.
Okay. Let's go look at Docker real quick, because I know that that's something that I think is pretty cool. And I think a lot of the Home Lab guys that want to learn about containers and Docker specifically for their jobs or school or whatnot can see some value here.
Yeah, so on the Synology platforms, they support Docker, and this is actually pretty fun. For we have a Ubiquiti environment here, and for a little bit for our Wi-Fi and router, and having the unified controller, you can either have a hardware device, and we don't like buying hardware, but
we don't like buying anything, quite honestly.
We have a lot of equipment, but we don't like buying anything. But you can also run it as a Docker container. And so this is an area where for the longest time, our first Docker container in the office was the unified controller. And this is the type of thing where you can have a Synology start to run applications. And Unify is one thing, but there are other applications out there. You can roll out almost anything in a container these days, and those are areas where you start seeing application workloads start to hit these types of NVMe devices.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. The package installed quickly, which is nice.
Yeah, and this is with our workload gen running in the background, hitting the storage on this. Oh, we don't want to look at help. We won't go into it directly.
So how intense, from a resource standpoint, is running Docker on one of these NASs? How much is this, the one we're using, got enough juice to make it go?
Oh yeah, I've run this on less equipped platforms.
What are we even on? We're on a 419, something like that?
DS 918 maybe?
918?
Yeah.
4-bay, native anyway.
But you get to see what the RAM usage of the system is, and as you deploy different containers, you can limit the amount of RAM that they have and how much CPU resources. But a lot of the Docker containers that you'd be running on a NAS don't really. I mean, you can definitely get some that will consume a ton of resources, but a lot of these guys just kind of like exist in the background for other devices to ping or be served information from.
The Home Lab nerds officially checking in. Jeremy saying, "Ooh, you can run Pi-hole on it too."
Yeah.
So I know that's a true Home Labber when I see those replies.
Yeah, there's a lot of fun things you can run on NAS, and considering you can download and install almost any Docker container, you could use it for any hundreds of thousands or millions of different uses. It really depends on where you want to go and take your insanity with it.
The insanity is already being documented, as Nathan points out. Either use a Pi Zero for $5 or a $300 plus NAS. Would the wife approve? Yeah, probably not, but that's only if you tell all the secrets. Nathan also wants to know, what your experience on Docker is. Do you have any projects you're working on? You were doing some VD-Bench testing, trying to run that before.
Yeah, we were working a lot of, trying to work out a good low-gen platform for that, and a lot of it is, as Kubernetes platforms start to peek their head out, we'll start doing more workloads on them. Right now, the focus is back onto a lot of HCI, a lot of Microsoft these days, but we really go where the wind takes us. I mean, if there's a ton of VMware activity coming out, we'll kind of be burying our head in the VMware side. If it's Microsoft, we'll go down that path. If it's Kubernetes and Docker, we'll go down that area. But it really depends.
All right, so we'll go wherever the wind takes us, and the wind is taking us away at the moment. We've really enjoyed this live cast. We're going to try to keep this up. It looks like with all the questions we got today that there's excitement and support for us to keep doing these. We'll bring in vendors as we can, and the plan ultimately is to take this show on the road as soon as that's a safe thing to do, and bring you individual meetings with all sorts of vendors with more of a technical approach, because we want to get past just the marketing and show you guys how these things work, what the interfaces look like, what the capabilities are. And we actually have one coming up that we're working on that I think you're really going to be excited about, involving NVMe over Fabrics, VMware 7, and all sorts of other fun high-speed action. So for now, we should probably pick a winner. I've been keeping track here on this 214 play. I think for my money,
Nathan had some pretty long questions.
He had long questions, but were they the right questions?
Do we have to pick one on air at the moment, or
We don't have to. We made the rules. We do have a real quick question. Is there any dedupe built into the DSM NASs?
I do not believe so. I don't kill me if there is, but I have not seen it on their mid-range or small mid-range platforms.
Yeah, I think they've got to go to something else, ZFS or something, to get to that. But the winner, we've calculated, we've tabulated, we've done some work, and while Kevin's pick had some good questions, Noah Beasley, you are the winner. You heard it live, so reach out, hit us info@storagereview.com or find Lucy on Twitter or Instagram or some other platform. Let us know how to get it to you, and it's yours, buddy. For everyone else, thanks for tuning in. Really appreciate the feedback, appreciate your support, and we'll be back soon with